Welcome back. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and unsettling truths about your brain. Your memories may not be as trustworthy as you think. It's comforting to believe that your mind is a safe, well-organized archive, where every experience you've lived is preserved like a photo album. But memory doesn't work like that. Each time you recall a moment from your past, your brain doesn't simply replay it, it reconstructs it. And in that reconstruction, details shift, emotions bleed in, and sometimes entire pieces are altered or invented. This means the memories you trust most, the ones you've revisited again and again, might actually be the least reliable. So, how accurate is your memory really? And what price do we pay when remembering wrong feels just as real as remembering right? That's what we'll explore in today's video. It feels comforting to imagine that your brain is like a library, lined with shelves of carefully catalogued memories, waiting for you to pull them down whenever you want. This sense of permanence is especially strong when we think about our oldest memories, childhood moments, first loves, life-changing events. Most people assume that once a memory is stored, and especially if it has been recalled at least once, it remains frozen in time, unchanged and untouched, like a photograph preserved in an album. But neuroscience paints a very different picture. Memory doesn't work like a filing cabinet. Instead, it behaves more like a living manuscript, one that is constantly being revised. Each time you recall a memory, you don't just retrieve it, you actively reconstruct it. And once it's pulled out into the light of your present awareness, it becomes malleable, subject to editing before it is aged again. What shapes this rewriting process? Everything you're experiencing right now, your current emotional state, your beliefs about the world, the context in which you're remembering, and even subtle social cues can alter the memory as it's put back into storage. Over time, the original details may blur or shift, replaced by layers of interpretation and reinterpretation. This means your memory of the past is less like a snapshot and more like a painting touched up again and again by a changing hand. What you recall today may not be exactly what you experienced years ago. It's what your present mind allows, edits, or even invents. And perhaps most strikingly, the more often a memory is recalled, the more chances it has to be reshaped. In other words, every act of remembering is also an act of rewriting. You don't experience the world in its entirety. You experience it through the narrow lens of your senses. Your eyes filter light into patterns. Your ears translate vibrations into sound. Your nose captures fleeting chemicals in the air. From the very beginning, your access to reality is incomplete, and your memory can only draw upon what your senses allowed in. But even that is not the full story. Perception is not the same as attention. You might walk through a crowded street, flooded with colors, voices, and smells, yet only remember the melody of one street performer or the anxious expression on a stranger's face. Why? Because your attention is selective. It chooses, often unconsciously, what becomes significant enough to register, and memory depends on attention. If you didn't truly focus on something in the moment, chances are you won't recall it later. Your brain doesn't create a perfect recording of reality. It creates a compressed, edited version of events based on what it considered important at the time. This means your memories are already limited before they even form. They are not faithful copies of the world you lived through, but reconstructions built on the slivers of perception your senses captured and the spotlight of attention that decided which of those slivers mattered. Among all your senses, one stands out as a powerful key to memory: smell. Unlike sight, sound, or touch, which must first be routed through various relay stations in the brain before reaching memory centers, smell takes a direct path. Odors travel straight to the medial temporal lobe, home to the hippocampus and other structures responsible for creating new long-term memories. This shortcut explains why a faint whiff of Perfume can instantly pull you back to your first love, or why the smell of fresh bread can make you feel like you're standing in your grandmother's kitchen again. The connection is immediate, emotional, and often startling in its clarity. Smell doesn't just trigger memory, it fuses with it. Because odors are tied so closely to the emotional centers of the brain, they don't simply recall the event, they resurrect the feelings you had at the time. That's why memories linked to smell often feel more vivid, more immersive, and more emotional than those tied to sight or sound, far from being a trivial sense. Smell serves as a hidden thread weaving together the fabric of your autobiographical memory. In many ways, it's the sense that anchors your past most firmly in the present. All of your senses eventually reach the memory centers of the brain, but most of them take the scenic route. Unlike smell, which has a direct expressway into the medial temporal lobe, senses such as sight, hearing, and touch must first pass through other brain regions. These way stations act like processing hubs, where information is sorted, filtered, and sometimes combined with input from other senses before being forwarded along. For example, visual information is routed through the thalamus, where it is integrated and prioritized before reaching higher cortical areas. Sounds, too, are analyzed and refined before moving deeper into the brain's memory systems. This detour allows the brain to shape sensory input into something meaningful, but it also means that by the time the signal reaches memory-forming regions, it has already been filtered and transformed. This stepwise processing ensures efficiency, but it also introduces opportunities for distortion or loss. Memory, therefore, is never built from raw reality. It is built from the brain's edited version of reality, shaped by what seemed most relevant or useful in the moment. Once sensory information is gathered and filtered through the brain's various pathways, it eventually converges in the medial temporal lobe. Here, it flows into a critical gateway known as the entorhinal cortex. This region acts as a hub, integrating inputs from different senses and beginning the process of weaving them into a conscious memory. Trace the foundation of what will later become a long-term memory. Think of the entorhinal cortex as the entry point to the brain's memory archive. Organizes the raw data, communicates closely with the hippocampus, and helps transform fleeting experiences into lasting recollections that you can retrieve days, years, or even decades later. But there's a vulnerability here. The entorhinal cortex is often one of the very first regions affected by Alzheimer's disease. As abnormal protein deposits begin to disrupt its function, people may find it harder to form new long-term memories. Even while older, well-established memories remain intact for a time. This is why one of the earliest and most recognizable symptoms of Alzheimer's is difficulty remembering recent events, what you just heard, what you were about to do, or where you placed your keys. This tells us something profound. Memory is not just about storing the past, it's about continually constructing the present. And when the entorhinal cortex falters, the bridge between now and tomorrow begins to weaken. Psychologists make an important distinction between short-term memory and long-term memory, and it's not just about the clock. The difference lies in how the information is being handled. What used to be called short-term memory is now better understood as working memory. It's not simply about holding a fact or number for a few seconds. It's about actively working with it. When you keep a phone number in your head just long enough to dial it, or when you juggle multiple pieces of information while solving a problem, you're using working memory. Think of working memory as your brain's mental notepad. It's limited in space. It needs to be constantly refreshed, and unless you rehearse or encode what's written there, it fades quickly. This is why repeating a word to yourself helps keep it alive in your mind. Long-term memory, by contrast, isn't about constant rehearsal, it's about storage and retrieval. Once information is encoded into long-term memory, it can stay with you for years or even a lifetime. But whether it gets stored depends heavily on attention, emotional significance, and how you interact with the information in the first place. So memory isn't just a passive warehouse. It's a system of active construction. Working memory is the workshop where ideas are held and manipulated. Long-term memory is the archive where finished products are stored. And moving something from one to the other requires effort, repetition, or meaning. Any piece of information that you're able to encode and later retrieve, even after a short delay, is already part of your long-term memory. The time frame doesn't need to stretch for years or decades. If you learn a fact, shift your focus to something else, and then recall that fact a few minutes later, it has already been moved from your working memory into long-term storage. This illustrates something important. Long-term memory is not just about permanence. It's about persistence beyond the present moment. The difference is less about how long you've known it, and more about whether your brain has taken the step of embedding that information into a network of neurons that allows for retrieval later. Every time you recall a detail from earlier in the day, or even a conversation from a few minutes ago, you're dipping into long-term memory. Whether that memory lasts a lifetime depends on reinforcement through repetition, meaning, or emotional weight, but the transition into long-term systems happens surprisingly quickly. In other words, your long-term memory is constantly at work, not just for childhood recollections or major life events, but for the everyday stream of experiences that quietly accumulate in the background of your mind. Patients with Alzheimer's disease often appear as though they are trapped in the present moment. They can carry on conversations, recognize familiar surroundings, or even recall distant memories from their childhood, but they struggle with holding on to what just happened a few seconds or minutes ago. The reason lies in the fragile process of converting working memories, those short-lived impressions we rehearse in the moment, into long-term memories that can be stored and recalled later. In Alzheimer's, the entorhinal cortex, one of the brain's key gateways for memory consolidation, becomes compromised early in the disease when this hub of communication falters. New information cannot be reliably encoded. It's as if experiences are written on a chalkboard that gets wiped clean every few minutes. That's why someone with Alzheimer's may ask the same question repeatedly, or forget that they've just finished a meal. This breakdown highlights the delicate machinery of memory. It's not that old memories vanish immediately. Those tend to remain accessible longer, but the brain loses its ability to create reliable new entries in the archive of long-term memory. In essence, Alzheimer's doesn't just erode the past. It disrupts the bridge between now and tomorrow. Even in the later stages of Alzheimer's disease, when the ability to form new memories is severely impaired, older memories often remain surprisingly resilient. These are the memories that have been reinforced repeatedly over time and stored across multiple brain networks. Interestingly, not all types of memory are equally vulnerable. While verbal memories like names, dates, or specific conversations often fade, nonverbal memories can linger much longer. For example, many patients retain a deep connection to music, a song from their youth, or a melody tied to an emotional moment. Can spark recognition, joy, or even singing along sometimes when the patient struggles to recall their own family members' names. This is because musical memories, unlike some verbal or episodic memories, are not as dependent on the brain regions that are first attacked by Alzheimer's pathology. Instead, they are distributed across networks that remain more intact until later in the disease. In this way, music often becomes a lifeline, preserving emotional connection and offering caregivers a powerful way to reach loved ones when words begin to fail. These moments remind us that memory is not just about facts stored in the brain, it is about the emotional and sensory experiences woven into who we are. And sometimes, even in the face of decline, those deeper layers of memory can still shine through when the entorhinal cortex is healthy and functioning properly. It acts like a gateway, delivering freshly perceived sensory information into the hippocampus, the brain's memory hub. Once the information arrives, the hippocampus transforms it into a unique pattern of neural firing, a kind of electrical fingerprint of the experience. This pattern doesn't just sit idle. Instead, it begins to circulate through a loop of interconnected cells, strengthening synaptic links and allowing the brain to stitch the new input into its existing fabric of knowledge. In this loop, the hippocampus is working at incredible speed, forming new associations almost instantly. It compares the current moment with the archive of the past. Have I seen something like this before? Does this smell match a familiar place? Does this sound connect to a memory of danger or comfort? The hippocampus tags the information with context, where you were, what you felt, and what was happening at the same time, so that later, when you try to recall the event, you aren't just pulling up a fact, but an entire scene layered with meaning and emotion. This rapid binding process is one of the reasons the hippocampus is so critical to memory formation. It doesn't just file away sensory fragments, it organizes them into coherent episodes, weaving together the what, where, and when of your life into lasting memories. Think of your hippocampus as both a translator and an archivist. Whenever an event occurs, countless regions of your brain light up: visual areas processing what you see, auditory areas handling what you hear, emotional centers reacting to how you feel. On their own, these bursts of activity would be scattered fragments, impossible to recall as a unified memory. The hippocampus steps in and compresses this chaos into order. It takes the broad pattern of neural activation across the brain and distills it into a compact cheat sheet, a simplified but powerful blueprint of the event. This cheat sheet doesn't store every pixel of experience, but it captures the essence: who was there, what happened, and why it mattered. This blueprint becomes the encoded memory. Later, when you recall the event, your brain doesn't reload every raw detail. Instead, it unpacks this hippocampal blueprint, reactivating associated regions and reconstructing the experience as best it can. That's why memory isn't a perfect recording, it's a reconstruction built from the notes your hippocampus left behind. In other words, the hippocampus is like a skilled editor who condenses hours of raw footage into a coherent highlight reel. It sacrifices some details, but preserves enough of the structure for you to recognize, relive, and reinterpret the experience long after it's gone. When you remember, your hippocampus is not simply playing back a recording, it's reconstructing what was happening across your brain at the time of the original experience. It pulls together visual fragments, sounds, emotions, and contextual cues, piecing them back into a coherent whole. But this reconstruction is never perfect. It's influenced by what's happened since the event, by your current emotional state, and even by what you expect to remember. Each act of recall reshapes the memory slightly, like opening a digital file, editing it, and saving it again. You also have some degree of control over this process. You can consciously decide to revisit a memory, intentionally walking down memory lane. This deliberate recall can strengthen the connections, making the memory more vivid and durable. Or you can redirect your focus, setting aside the past to concentrate on a new task in the present. In this way, remembering is both active and flexible. It's not about retrieving a perfectly preserved snapshot. It's about reconstructing an experience from the notes your brain left behind. That's why memories can feel alive, shifting slightly each time you return to them. Every time you recall a memory, your hippocampus does more than replay the old file. It actually creates a new version of it. Instead of simply pulling out the original neural pattern and putting it back unchanged, it reconstructs and rewrites it, layering in fresh details and discarding parts that seem less relevant. This means your memories are not fixed snapshots, they are dynamic, evolving narratives. With each act of remembering, the hippocampus incorporates new information: how you feel now, what you've learned since, and even suggestions or cues from the environment around you. At the same time, it may prune away aspects that no longer feel important, reshaping the memory to fit your present perspective. This process is called reconsolidation, and it's the reason why memories are both powerful and fragile. It allows your brain to update old experiences with new insights, making them more useful in the present. But it also means your memories are vulnerable to distortion. Each recall is like opening a file, editing it without realizing, and saving it again, so the story you tell yourself about the past may not be the same one you lived out in essence. The hippocampus turns memory into a living, breathing process. It doesn't preserve the past in perfect form. It reshapes it into something that reflects who you are now and what you need to carry forward. There's an element of randomness woven into every act of remembering. This unpredictability is both the strength and the weakness of what the hippocampus does. On the one hand, the ability to mentally travel back in time to reconstruct and re-experience fragments of your past is nothing short of extraordinary. It allows you to learn from experience, connect events across years, and even relive moments that shaped who you are. But this same flexibility leaves memory vulnerable to distortion. Each time your hippocampus reconstructs an event, it doesn't just pull from the original blueprint, it also leaves room for noise, for suggestion, and for error. A stray comment from someone else, a story you heard, or your own shifting emotions can slip into the memory trace. Over time, these details can become so seamlessly woven in that you believe they've always been there. This is the paradox of memory. It is both remarkably vivid and surprisingly unreliable. The randomness allows creativity, imagination, and adaptability. Yet it also opens the door for pollution of the past moments remembered differently than they truly happened, or even events remembered that never occurred at all. In essence, your hippocampus is like a master storyteller who can bring the past to life in rich color, but sometimes, without meaning to, it adds a flourish that never existed, and soon even you can't tell where the truth ends and the embellishment begins. Myth vs. truth. How accurate is your memory? Myth. Your memory is an accurate reflection of what actually happened. Like a video recording, it captures the truth of your past and stores it safely until you choose to replay it. Truth. Memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Each time you recall an event, you don't just play it back, you rebuild it from scratch. And in that act of rebuilding, your brain reshapes the memory, sometimes strengthening it, sometimes altering it, and sometimes even replacing details with things that never happened. This is why the formation of false memories is so common. Your brain can easily combine information from two similar events, blur their boundaries, or insert a detail that fits the story but wasn't actually there. In some cases, it can even generate a completely new event, a memory of something that never happened at all. For the most part, these small distortions are harmless. They help you simplify your past, organize your experiences, and fill in the blanks so your personal narrative feels coherent. But they also serve as a reminder. Every memory you hold is part truth, part story, and part imagination. In essence, memory isn't a perfect archive of the past, it's a living, editable manuscript, rewritten every time you open it when the stakes are low. Memory distortions are usually harmless mixing up of occasion detail or misremembering who told you a story won't change much. But when someone's life or freedom depends on the accuracy of a memory, the consequences can be devastating. This is especially true in the realm of eyewitness testimony. Courts often place great weight on a confident witness who insists they remember exactly what happened. Yet, decades of research in psychology and neuroscience have shown that confidence does not equal accuracy. Memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. And reconstructions are fragile, prone to suggestion, stress, leading questions, and even the witness's own expectations. History is filled with cases where eyewitness misidentification led to wrongful convictions. People have spent years, even decades, behind bars because someone was sure they saw them at the scene of a crime. Later, DNA evidence often tells a different story. This is why scientists and legal experts caution us. Eyewitness testimony should never stand alone as decisive evidence. No matter how compelling the story or how certain the witness seems, memory failures remind us that the human brain is not an infallible camera. When lives are on the line, relying exclusively on memory is not only risky, it can be deadly. Your hippocampus doesn't store entire memories like files in a cabinet. Instead, it acts as a pointer system, a kind of directory that tells your brain which regions need to be reactivated so that you can re-experience an event. Visual details are revived in the visual cortex, sounds in the auditory cortex, emotions in the amygdala, and so on. The hippocampus orchestrates this recall, pulling together the fragments so that a memory feels whole. But here's the key. This process isn't neutral. The way the hippocampus does its job is shaped by the act of remembering itself, which parts of the memory you focus on, which cues you respond to, what emotions you're feeling at the time. All of these determine what gets retrieved and reinforced. Just as importantly, they also influence what gets left out. Over time, the pointer map can change. If you repeatedly recall one detail but ignore others, the hippocampus strengthens its links to the repeated parts and weakens its ties to the forgotten ones. This is why certain fragments of an event, like a face, a smell, or a particular emotion, can remain crystal clear, while the rest fades into vagueness taught in other words. Your hippocampus is not a passive librarian. It's an active editor, reshaping the accessibility of your memories every time you recall them. Remembering is as much about what you lose as it is about what you keep. If you retrieve a memory in the same way, again and again, something remarkable happens. The hippocampus gradually becomes less central to the process. Instead, the areas of the brain that are activated together during recall begin to form their own direct associations, almost like a shortcut. Think of it as a kind of neural rehearsal. Each time you recall the memory, the same pattern of brain regions lights up. Over time, those regions become linked more tightly to one another, so that they can activate independently, without needing the hippocampus to guide them. This is why memories that are rehearsed or retold often, such as childhood stories, important facts, or even traumatic experiences, become more stable and enduring. They shift from being fragile, hippocampus-dependent traces into more distributed, long-term networks across the cortex. But there's a catch. This same process can also lock in distortions. If you consistently remember an event with a particular spin, whether it's an exaggerated detail, a missing piece, or even a false addition, those distortions can become hardwired into the memory. Over time, the brain essentially treats the modified version as the truth. In this way, repetition makes memories feel more vivid and more certain, but not necessarily more accurate. The brain is building stronger pathways, but it's building them around whatever content you keep rehearsing. When it comes to memory, time and repetition change the way the brain stores information. Memories that are recalled again and again gradually shift their storage base from the hippocampus to other regions of the cortex. In a sense, they become self-sufficient, no longer needing the hippocampus as a central hub to reconstruct them. This explains one of the most striking features of Alzheimer's disease. Patients often struggle to form new memories or recall what happened just a few minutes ago, because the medial temporal lobe, including the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex, is one of the first areas to deteriorate. Yet, paradoxically, these same patients can often vividly recall events from decades earlier, a childhood home, a wedding day, or the lyrics of old songs. The reason is that these older memories have been retrieved and reconstructed countless times over the years. Each rehearsal strengthened the connections in the wider cortical networks until those memories no longer relied on the hippocampus at all. They became distributed fixtures in the brain, resistant to the early stages of Alzheimer's pathology. It's a powerful reminder that memory isn't a single thing stored in one place. It's a dynamic system that evolves over time. Some memories remain fragile, tethered to the hippocampus. Others, hardened through repetition, can outlast even the breakdown of the very structures that first created them. The feeling of truly re-experiencing a memory, of stepping back into its sights, sounds, and even smells almost always depends on the hippocampus. This region doesn't just help piece together the factual skeleton of what happened, it provides the rich sensory and emotional tapestry that makes remembering feel like reliving. We know this because patients with hippocampal damage reveal the difference. Even when such patients can recall facts from long ago, like the name of their elementary school or the year they graduated, they often cannot summon the sensory details that make those memories vivid. They might know that a childhood birthday party happened, but they cannot reimagine the laughter, the cake's sweetness, or the colors of the balloons dot. In other words, the hippocampus is critical for episodic memory, the kind of memory that allows us to mentally time travel and re-enter past experiences. Without it, people retain semantic memory, facts, knowledge, general information, but lose the ability to immerse themselves in the sensory and emotional context of those events. This distinction explains why someone with hippocampal damage or patients with advanced Alzheimer's disease may still recall the facts of their early life while struggling to relive the texture of those moments. The hippocampus is the gateway to the vividness of memory, even for events that occurred decades in the past. When the hippocampus is severely damaged, the consequences for memory are profound. The most striking symptom is severe amnesia, which manifests as two interrelated problems: an inability to form new long-term memories. Patients can still hold information briefly in their working memory, such as remembering a phone number for a few seconds. But once their attention shifts, the information is lost. Without a functioning hippocampus, the process of consolidating those fleeting impressions into stable long-term memories simply breaks down. Retrograde amnesia around the time of injury: not only is the future impaired, but the past is also affected. Patients often lose access to memories that were being laid down in the days, weeks, or even months surrounding the time of the damage. These memories were still fragile and had not yet been fully consolidated into the cortex, making them especially vulnerable. This combination creates a devastating effect. Patients may clearly recall their childhood, adolescence, or early adult life, yet remain trapped in an eternal present, unable to add new chapters to their story or remember events that occurred just before the injury. The famous case of Henry Molaison HMM illustrates this vividly. After his hippocampi was surgically removed in the 1950s to treat epilepsy, he could no longer form new long-term memories. Each interaction felt to him as though it were happening for the first time, even if he had met the person only hours earlier. What's fascinating, however, is that other types of memory, like procedural memory skills such as playing the piano, drawing, or riding a bike, remain largely intact without the hippocampus. This tells us that memory is not a single process but a network of systems, with the hippocampus playing a central role in episodic and declarative memory. While other brain circuits handle skills and habits, amnesia is dramatic, but it's far from the only way our memory can fail us. Psychologist Daniel Schacter created a powerful framework known as the 7 Sins of Memory, a classification of the common ways our memory trips us up. These sins aren't moral failings, they're simply the byproducts of how the memory system evolved to be flexible, adaptive, and efficient, sometimes at the cost of accuracy. Schacter divides these flaws into 3 categories of forgetting sins of omission, 3 categories of distortion sins of commission, and one final sin that reflects memory's sometimes overwhelming persistence. 1. Sins of forgetting omission. Transience. Memories fade over time if they aren't regularly retrieved or reinforced. Absent-mindedness. We fail to remember because our attention was never fully engaged in the first place, like misplacing your keys because you weren't paying attention when you set them down. Blocking. A memory is there, but you can't access it at the moment. Think of the frustrating tip of the tongue experience. 2. Sins of distortion commission. Misattribution. Remembering something accurately, but attributing it to the wrong source. For example, thinking you read a fact in a book when it was actually from a friend. Suggestibility. Memories can be altered or implanted by external cues or leading questions, which is why eyewitness testimony can be unreliable. Bias. Our current beliefs, feelings, or knowledge distort how we recall the past, reshaping memories to fit present perspectives. 3. The sin of persistent separatist. Some memories won't fade, even when we wish they would. Traumatic events, intrusive thoughts, and flashbacks can haunt us despite our efforts to forget together. These 7 sins illustrate that memory is not a flawless recorder of the past, but a dynamic, fallible system. While these flaws can sometimes be frustrating or even harmful, they also reveal why memory is flexible enough to let us adapt, reinterpret, and move forward. Transience. The fading of memory over time. All memories are built to last. Transience refers to the natural tendency of certain memories to become less accessible as time passes. This fading is not a defect in our system, it's an adaptation. Imagine if you carried with you, in vivid detail, every single moment you ever experienced, the color of the socks you wore on a random Tuesday 5 years ago, or what you had for lunch on a long-forgotten afternoon. Such mental clutter would overwhelm your ability to focus on what truly matters. Instead, the brain has evolved to prioritize the essentials. Over time, the mind sheds unnecessary details while holding onto the gist, the core meaning or general impression of what happened. From this gist, the brain can later reconstruct the fuller story, filling in missing pieces when needed. But here lies the trade-off. Because memories are reconstructive, the narrative we rebuild may not perfectly match what actually happened. On the bright side, this selective forgetting is protective. It streamlines cognition, clears space for new learning, and prevents us from being paralyzed by excessive detail. Yet it also means that even important events can become distorted in our recollection, especially if we rely solely on our own mental archives rather than external reminders like photographs, journals, or recordings. In short, transience reminds us that forgetting is not failure, it's function. Memory's goal is not to capture reality with flawless precision, but to balance accuracy with efficiency, ensuring we carry forward the lessons and meanings that matter most. Absent-mindedness. When attention slips. Memory slips. Absent-mindedness is one of the most common and most relatable failures of memory. Unlike transience, which reflects the natural fading of memories over time, absent-mindedness is about failing to properly encode the memory in the first place. Memory is inseparable from attention. If you are distracted when new information is presented, your brain never gives it a fair chance of being stored. The hippocampus, which is crucial for consolidating experiences into long-term memory, depends on attentional systems to highlight what's important. If attention is scattered, perhaps because you're multitasking, preoccupied, or simply exhausted, the hippocampus doesn't receive enough detail to form a solid memory trace. That's why so many everyday mistakes, like misplacing your keys, forgetting why you walked into a room, or overlooking a crucial detail in a conversation, can often be traced back not to a bad memory, but to a moment of inattention. It's not that the memory was lost, it was never properly written down in the first place. Cognitive scientists point out that absent-mindedness also illustrates a broader truth. Attention is a limited resource. We can only deeply process a few things at once. And when we divide our focus, we sacrifice the richness of encoding. On the upside, this scene is manageable. Mindfulness practices, slowing down, and consciously directing attention to the task at hand can dramatically reduce absent-minded errors. Writing things down, using external cues, and creating deliberate routines like always placing your phone or keys in the same spot are strategies the brain can lean on when its attentional system inevitably falters. In short, absent-mindedness reminds us that memory starts with paying attention. Without attention, memory is like a book that was never written. The story can't be read later, because it was never recorded at all. Blocking. When a memory hides in plain sight, so means it feels like your memory is playing tricks on you. You know the answer, you can almost feel it hovering at the edge of your awareness, but it refuses to come into focus. This frustrating experience is what psychologists call blocking. A classic example is the tip of the tongue phenomenon. You can recall fragments of the information, like the first letter of a word, or the general shape of a name, yet the complete memory stays just out of reach. It's not that the memory is gone, it's temporarily inaccessible, as though the brain has misplaced the pointer that normally directs you to it. Interestingly, blocking often resolves itself once you stop trying so hard. The stress of forcing recall can actually interfere with retrieval. But when you relax, shift focus, or give it a little time, the memory often pops back into awareness, sometimes hours later. When you least expect it, on a deeper level, blocking happens because of the competition between memories. When several similar memory traces overlap, they can interfere with one another, preventing the correct one from surfacing. This is why you might confuse two names, or recall the wrong but related word before the right one finally emerges. While blocking is a normal part of memory's quirks, persistent or severe word-finding difficulties can also signal more serious conditions. In neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, blocking becomes more frequent and less likely to resolve. What's normal frustration in everyday life, forgetting a word and retrieving it later, can, in this context, reflect deeper problems in the brain's memory systems. Ultimately, blocking highlights both the strength and fragility of memory. The information is still there, but the brain's retrieval process isn't always smooth. It's a reminder that memory is dynamic, not mechanical. It's not a perfectly organized filing cabinet, but a living network where access depends on context, attention, and sometimes patience. Misattribution. When memories get their wires crossed, and of the most subtle, yet impactful. Memory errors is misattribution, remembering the content of an event correctly, but assigning it to the wrong time, place, or person. In other words, the memory trace is intact, but the source tags that should anchor it to context get scrambled. A common form of misattribution is source confusion. You may vividly recall a piece of information, but mistakenly believe you heard it from a trusted friend, when in fact it came from a news article, a rumor, or even your own imagination. These errors often feel completely convincing, which makes them particularly problematic in high-stakes situations like eyewitness testimony. In courts of law, a witness may confidently describe details they genuinely remember, only to later discover they misattributed those details to the wrong person or moment. Research shows that older adults are especially prone to source confusions. This isn't because their memories vanish, but because the brain regions that help manage context and monitor accuracy, particularly the frontal lobes, become less efficient with age. Without strong oversight from these regions, the mind is more likely to blend details or attach them to the wrong narrative. Misattribution also underscores the constructive nature of memory. Our brains don't store experiences as perfectly labeled files. Instead, memory operates like a constantly edited story, drawing on fragments from different sources and weaving them together into what feels like a seamless narrative. Most of the time, this system serves us well. But when details from one memory leak into another, or when a faint recollection is filled in with the wrong source, the result can be an error that feels absolutely real. This is why misattribution is sometimes called the confidence trap of memory. You can be entirely sure of your recollection, even when it's wrong. And unlike absent-minded slips, misattributed memories can reshape how we understand our past, influence our decisions, and even affect how we see ourselves and others. Suggestibility. When outside voices rewrite our memories while source confusion can quietly distort our recollections, the effects of suggestibility are often far more dramatic. Suggestibility refers to the brain's tendency to incorporate new information into an existing memory, even if that information is inaccurate. In other words, our memories are not only vulnerable to our own biases, but also to the influence of those around us. The groundbreaking work of psychologist Elizabeth Lafters has shown just how malleable memory can be. Through carefully designed experiments, she demonstrated that people can be led to believe in, and even vividly recall, events that never actually happened. For instance, by combining leading questions with reinforcement from a Confederate someone pretending to be another participant, Loftus and her colleagues were able to plant entirely false memories, such as being lost in a shopping mall as a child. Many participants didn't just accept the suggestion, they created detailed, sensory-rich recollections of the fictitious event. This is because every act of remembering is also an act of reconstructing. When external cues or suggestions are present, the brain often weaves them seamlessly into the memory trace. Over time, the false detail can become indistinguishable from the original memory, blurring the line between what actually happened and what was merely suggested. Suggestibility has profound real-world implications. In legal contexts, eyewitness testimony can be dramatically altered by how questions are phrased. Subtle wording shifts, like asking how fast cars were going when they smashed versus bumped, and led to different memories of the same event. The confidence of the witness does not protect against this. In fact, people may become equally confident in their false recollections. Suggestibility reminds us that memory is not a fixed archive, but a living narrative, constantly vulnerable to external input. While this adaptability can sometimes help us learn and integrate new information, it also makes us prone to errors, distortions, and even implanted memories. Bias. When the present colors the past among the quirks of memory, bias might be the most subtle and insidious. This sin of memory refers to the way our current thoughts, feelings, and beliefs reshape how we recall the past. Rather than offering us a clear, unfiltered window into what really happened, memory is constantly filtered through the lens of who we are now. One common form of bias is the tendency to exaggerate the overlap between our past and present selves. We often look back and assume we always felt this way, always believed that, when in truth, our past opinions or emotional states may have been very different. For example, someone who is happily married today might downplay the struggles they experienced early in the relationship, while someone going through a breakup might reinterpret their past as full of warning signs they overlooked. Bias also shows up in political and cultural memory. People frequently reinterpret their past beliefs to align with their current worldview, convincing themselves they always knew a certain stance was right. In this way, bias doesn't just shape personal memory, it helps us maintain a sense of continuity and self-coherence. Even if that continuity is an illusion, neuroscience suggests that bias occurs because memory is reconstructive. Each act of remembering is influenced by the brain's present context, our goals, values, and emotional state. Instead of passively replaying the past, the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex weave old details into a story that makes sense today. This storytelling can smooth over inconsistencies, but it also distorts the truth. Sometimes, bias even influences how we remember our own abilities and experiences. Students may recall studying harder than they did after doing well on a test, or patients may remember a treatment as less painful if it ended on a positive note. These examples highlight the fact that memory is less about accuracy and more about making meaning in the present dot in everyday life. Bias helps us protect our identity and preserve a coherent life story. But it also means we must approach our memories with humility. What we remember so confidently may not be the truth of the past, it may be a reflection of the person we've become since then. Persistence. When the past refuses to let go like the previous memory since, which revolve around forgetting, distortion, or temporary failures of recall. Persistence is the opposite problem. It occurs when the brain clings too tightly to certain memories, replaying them over and over, even when we desperately wish to forget. Persistent memories are often emotional memories, the kinds etched deeply into the brain by moments of trauma, abuse, fear, or overwhelming stress. Here, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, plays a central role. When an event carries strong emotional weight, the amygdala signals the hippocampus to encode the memory with extra strength. This helps ensure survival, remembering the place where danger struck, or the circumstances of a painful event, can protect us from repeating the same mistake. But in some cases, this mechanism becomes pathological. Instead of helping, persistent remembering turns into an endless replay of the past. Victims of trauma and abuse often describe flashbacks, intrusive images, or even bodily sensations that force them to relive their worst experiences as though they were happening in real time. In post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), this persistence can be debilitating, keeping people locked in a cycle where the past dominates the present. Even outside of trauma, persistence can affect everyday life. Think of the embarrassing moment you can't stop replaying, or the argument that resurfaces in your mind days or weeks later. These memories crowd out other thoughts, occupying valuable cognitive real estate. Unlike transience or absent-mindedness, which serve adaptive purposes, persistence often represents memory's dark side, the inability to let go. From a neuroscience perspective, persistence highlights the emotional weight of memory. Strong emotions carve deeper grooves in the brain circuitry, making certain memories more resistant to fading. While this can help us learn from danger or reinforce important life lessons, it also makes us vulnerable to obsessive rumination and emotional distress. In short, persistence shows that forgetting isn't always a flaw. Sometimes it's a mercy. The challenge of memory is not only remembering enough, but also forgetting just enough to move forward. With all of its faults, forgetting, distortion, and persistence, it's natural to ask, what is this kind of memory actually good for? The truth is that memory is not just about keeping a record of the past. It's about preparing us for the future. The hippocampus, the brain's hub for memory, doesn't only reconstruct past experiences. It also plays a central role in imagination, especially the kind that requires us to project ourselves into scenarios that haven't happened yet. This ability is sometimes called prospection, the mental time travel that lets you rehearse future conversations, imagine solutions to problems, or plan what you will do tomorrow. When you draw on memory to imagine what could happen, the hippocampus is stitching together fragments of old experiences, sights, sounds, emotions, places into something new. For example, when you picture yourself walking into a job interview, your brain is reassembling past memories of offices, conversations, and your own emotional responses into a simulated future memory. This process isn't perfect, but it's incredibly adaptive. It allows you to anticipate challenges, prepare responses, and even regulate your emotions ahead of time. In this sense, the flaws of memory, its reconstructive nature, its openness to influence, its tendency to change each time we recall, are not bugs but features. They give the brain the flexibility to remix the past in order to navigate the future. A rigid, perfectly accurate memory might feel comforting, but it would leave us less able to adapt to new circumstances. So, while your memories may not always be accurate records of what happened, they serve a deeper purpose, helping you imagine what might come next. and giving you the cognitive tools to step into the future better prepared. If you compare the brain's activity when you're reliving a vivid, autobiographical memory with what happens when you're imagining a future event, something remarkable shows up. The patterns of neural activation overlap to a striking degree. In other words, your brain doesn't draw a sharp line between remembering the past and anticipating the future. It uses many of the same circuits for both. Psychologist Daniel Schachter has suggested that this is no accident. Rather, we have evolved this type of flexible memory system because it serves a survival purpose. Memory isn't just a dusty archive of what happened, it's a simulation engine. By reassembling fragments of past experiences, the brain can project countless what-if scenarios, allowing us to mentally test possible futures without actually living them out. Imagine preparing for a difficult conversation, rehearsing a performance, or planning how you'd respond to an emergency. Your brain is pulling from stored memories of voices you've heard, places you've been, emotions you've felt, and recombining them into a blueprint for the future. This ability to imagine multiple outcomes helps us evaluate which paths are most likely to succeed and what actions we need to take to get there. The overlap between memory and imagination highlights why accuracy isn't the only goal of memory. A perfectly preserved, unchangeable record might seem appealing, but it would leave us less able to adapt to changing circumstances. By being reconstructive, by reshaping each memory every time we recall it, the brain gains the flexibility to innovate, plan, and dream. In short, your memory isn't just about the past, it's a launchpad for the future. One of the best resources for diving deeper into the science of memory is Daniel Schachter's The 7 Sins of Memory. In this influential book, Schachter explores the ways in which our memory system is inherently flawed, not because it is broken, but because those flaws are built into how it works. He identifies 7 sins, ranging from forgetting and distortion to the persistence of intrusive memories, and shows how each of these reflects the brain's deeper design. Rather than seeing memories' imperfections as failures, Schachter reframes them as essential trade-offs that make us flexible, imaginative, and adaptive creatures. His work reveals that our memory is not a static archive of the past, but a living system, constantly reshaped by experience, context, and the needs of the present moment. Memory is powerful, but it is also fragile. Every recollection is not a photograph of the past, but a reconstruction shaped by attention, emotion, and even imagination. That means our memories can mislead us, but they can also help us dream, plan, and prepare for the future. So the next time you feel certain about what you remember, pause and ask yourself, how much of this is the past, and how much of it is my mind reshaping the story? If you enjoyed exploring the strange price of remembering wrong, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves brain science, and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of the mind. Your brain has many secrets, and we're just beginning to unlock them.